Okay, we're gonna get started. Thanks so much for being here. Very excited about this one. Weekly planning is one of my favorite productivity topics, so excited to jump into this today. And also just going to talk about some tips, some common mistakes that we have that are common for all of us, and some resources that I'm going to share with you all, and then also talk about the Notion template that is actually launching today, just launched a few hours ago. So, and then we'll have some opportunity for Q&A on anything Notion or weekly planning related. Agenda, what definitely want to go through today is a little exercise, some common mistakes, the building blocks of just mastering weekly planning and reflection. And then we're going to kind of see what this looks like in a Notion space, which is definitely a personal preference in terms of a lot of this stuff could be done in pen and paper. Big benefit of Notion is that when you start to incorporate things like databases or just relating information to each other, you can start to automate some of these manual processes and then also see some of the data and wins and challenges over the course of a week that could really give you more insight into how you're doing and the progress that you're making. So that's definitely a goal for today. So a little note about me. My name's Dave. I'm a Notion certified consultant. That's me, my wife, my daughter. We are in Miami, Florida, and I've been working with individuals and small teams from early 2021 and actually started using Notion in 2016 when I ran a company called Superform, which was a creative agency, where we used it mostly for project management and for kind of creating client dashboards, which was a great use case for just getting visibility into, from the client's perspective, on like where were we at with projects and starting to link documents and resources together. So it wasn't up until late 2021 where kind of started working more with startups and companies. Also, side note on Miami, when I mentioned I live in Miami, we think of South Beach and like Ocean Drive, but in reality, we're not there. Just kind of, you go 30-40 minutes west, very much suburban lifestyle, so which we prefer. But just kind of a funny tidbit. And for those of you in Miami, definitely curious where you're at, but yeah, maybe we could connect at some point. All right, so in terms of like Notion consulting, this has just kind of like been my timeline of, that I mentioned, but really started from an agency standpoint and using it to just manage projects. And it wasn't until last year where, I've always, it wasn't until like 2020 where like a Notion started to come out with a lot of new features that were super interesting and actually started to save time, where you can create templates of pages and workspaces and really start to streamline workflows, and you can kind of build your own canvas of how you work and presenting information in a way that makes the most sense to you or to your team. So just created content, independently, and was able to connect with entrepreneurs and creators, and individual workshops turned into like multi-series workshops, and getting into this year and getting Notion's certification just kind of led to working with bigger companies. But my big goal is, as I'm working with companies, I'm thinking through how can this positively impact creators and freelancers, solopreneurs, and take some of these winning strategies that are working with larger companies and apply them as individuals, or as small teams. So very excited about that, and always thinking through scenarios that we could, apply these or share resources with you all. So, that's kind of my goal. This is both from personal experience and from running an agency, but weekly planning for me is one of the critical parts of any type of productivity system or framework. On the one hand, we're tying in larger goals, quarterly objectives, key results, and we're moving all the way down into tracking our habits daily. We're getting into completing tasks and making sure that we're making progress across multiple projects, which if we compare this to like daily planning, for example, it's a lot easier to get into a routine where, you've got set times of the day where you're performing certain habits, and you could know that, at this time in the morning, I'm planning the day, and at this time in the evening, I'm doing a quick reflection. But with the weeks, every week kind of feels a little bit different, and it could be harder to get a rhythm, especially without a framework or a system that works for you. So that's what this is kind of about, just walking through an example to hopefully get some ideas and some wheels turning as to how you might build your own system. So, as we mentioned, the best weekly plans are not only, tracking habits and managing projects, but we're also thinking bigger. What are the actions that we're doing today? How are they helping us reach a particular objective? How are we moving the needle with the key results that we're tracking? And just making sure that the actions that we're doing are highest leverage and are the best use of our time and energy. A lot of times, if we don't have some of these systems in place, it could feel like we're productive, but we either don't have insight as to how our work is positively impacting and moving us closer to our goals, or we haven't gone through that first step of defining goals in the first place. So that's a critical piece that we'll take a look at today also. Side note, if there's any questions whatsoever that come up throughout the webinar, definitely feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can kind of keep that as a running log so that for Q&A we have some questions to go over, and make sure that any questions we can address for you all. All right, so a couple notes on the template that we're looking at. So there's a big difference between what we're looking at as a framework versus a blueprint. If we look at, if you've noticed, there's been a huge growth of Notion templates, and some of which are free resources, some of which are paid resources. And the biggest limitation with not all of them, but a lot of them, is they tend to work as blueprints, meaning somebody has figured out a system that worked for them and decided to templatize it, and with or without any kind of knowledge or awareness of, does this system work for other people? So that's a huge part of building this, is thinking through how can this act as a guide where every user adapts it in their own way and starts to maybe edit out some things that are not important or that you don't want to track in Notion. So, when I work with clients, I'm always hesitant to migrate them from another tool to Notion, because you're also disrupting an entire workflow. You're changing how people work. So if we do adopt Notion for specific actions, it has to be because we're either saving time, we feel more organized, or we can see information next to each other that helps us work or make certain decisions. So I just wanted to make a note on that. All right, big challenges with weekly planning. So these are kind of the things that have come up the most in terms of both creating content like via YouTube and blog posts, and just connecting with people back when I released the Manifest OS from last year, and connecting with users. These are some of the common trends that have come up over essentially the past year, both for individuals, creators, and for companies. So do want to bring these up and kind of quickly run through these. So first one, very common, getting caught up in the details. It's, could be helpful to get very granular as to like where you are with your week and the schedule and accounting for every minute. But the more time we spend on the micro level and on the details, we're maybe spending less time on bigger goals, whether those are annual goals or whether those are quarterly objectives or key results. So something to think about there. The next one, just going through these, but next biggest challenge is not connecting our day-to-day actions to bigger goals. So in previous content, I've talked about really starting with a vision and working our way down. And if you're in this mental space, reading things like David Allen's Getting Things Done, or even James Clear's Atomic Habits, even though it's habit focused, it's also really talking about bigger vision and longer term goals. But we want to make sure that we're tying our actions to bigger goals and making sure that those actions are directly influencing and helping us get there. So making sure that that's a strong connection. The next one, this can be very difficult, especially if you have a family or if you have a demanding job, but really having control and agency over your time and blocking out areas for deep work or for creative work. If you're a freelancer, this could be, people scheduling meetings on your Calendly. If you're working in an office, it could be people scheduling meetings on your behalf. So having a way to block out certain areas of the week, even if it's just a couple hours a week for those really trying tasks that tend to also be the highest leverage, is pretty critical. So, especially as we get through toward the end of the week, it could be harder to have that connection with our bigger goals, but really blocking those out in advance and having a strong understanding of where our time is going and how it's allocated by project or by area. So, and these last two are really dealing with reflection. So we tend to kind of go full into something, if we think of New Year's resolutions and we've got that momentum and adrenaline, whereas in December, we tend to not reflect as much, even though reflection is really the only opportunity to look back on what we've accomplished, what progress we've made, where we had success, where we fell short, and using that to strategize for the next week. So if we think about reflection as kind of step 0 for next week, it's really a combination of reflection and planning. So, and that's part of, when we get into the Manifest Weekly Planner, the last 4 or 5 steps are really about reflection in a few different ways. And the last one, again, it's more of a qualitative review on how did the week feel? How did the week go? What were some things that you learned or some key takeaways? And again, this is often the only opportunity to take a step back, zoom out, and really just kind of write down thoughts on these aspects of the week to be able to make sure that we're making progress and making incremental improvements week over week. All right. So with that said, I'm going to share a quick resource, and while I'm doing that, got a quick poll. Want to get your take on it, but kind of curious from you all, like, where do you feel like you're struggling the most in these 5 categories, just to get a sense of where everyone's at, and maybe tailoring the rest of the webinar a little bit more based on that. And a resource I'm going to share, I'm going to drop this in the chat, but this is, we can look at this as like the analog version of the weekly planner, where we're just kind of writing out the key steps that we're taking to make sure that we're covering all of our bases when it comes to weekly planning. So Erica, I put it as multiple choice, but it's good to get that note in the chat, so it's good to know. Thanks for that. We'll give everybody a couple or another minute. So these are all the key components that go into the Manifest Weekly Planner, but it's often helpful to kind of write out some of these notes and ideas on digital paper and not necessarily in a database or in a dashboard, just to kind of get a sense of where we're at and where we might want to take some more time and go a little bit deeper in any one of these areas. So what I want to do is go through a couple of the first steps to kind of get us going, and then see what this looks like in the template to see some of the benefits of mostly seeing everything in one place, and especially with Notion's new features and updates, being able to bring in data from different places and see it all in the same page, which I'm still super excited about, even though it's been several weeks now. But to see how that could, make this process, like weekly planning, a lot easier and a lot less heavy mentally, just to kind of navigate all of these different things. So when we get into what makes a masterful week, the first step of stopping, pausing, taking stock of where we're at, it's the beginning of quarter two. Maybe we set up goals at the beginning of the year, and some of those we are working toward, and maybe others we just kind of lost interest in. But this comes from I believe it's Michael Hyatt's Free to Focus book, which is a great resource, kind of a unique take on productivity. But often we tend to jump into action mode without necessarily pausing and having a space to reflect on where we're at. So with that said, if we haven't necessarily set up some big goals, and big goals defined as like a year to 3 to 5 years, anywhere in that like range, that's the starting point for zooming in further and further into our daily actions. So when we think about, and there's an example in here that you can take a look at, but for example, personally transitioning to a full-time Notion consultant and a content creator. So background on me, I also work in education. I work with high school students teaching computer science. So balancing that with consulting, creating content, and family does require systems where I can kind of block out, what time am I allocating to each area, and how does that shift based on, key dates or deadlines. So from there, thinking through if we have key objectives, maybe it's releasing a certain number of blog posts or YouTube videos, getting into the metrics aspect of we're going from quarterly objectives to specifically key results. And if we go back into the exercise, there's some added notes on objectives and key results. If you're not familiar with them, or if you're new to them, they're really mostly used for within startups and larger companies as a way to kind of track progress and really focus energy and attention on a small number of goals, but really can have a big impact for creators and for solopreneurs and freelancers. So a lot of the same things apply, a little bit different, but fundamentally could be pretty helpful. So if we start with big goals and then work our way down to quarterly objectives, we're still technically at the start of quarter two. So thinking through what are those like 2 or 3 objectives that you'd want to have achieved by the middle of the year, and getting more granular, what are 2 or 3 measurements for each of those objectives that you can work your way toward. And we'll get into some real examples of that. And then one last one in terms of setting intentions, again, more on the qualitative side, but when we think about the upcoming week, it could be very easy to get too focused on tasks and projects that we're trying to complete, but really from a qualitative, like where do I want to be at the end of the week? And in some cases, some weeks are more driven by your personal life or professional life or side hustle, things like that. So each of these weeks are going to have a different feel and a different energy, and it's definitely important to not skip that step of just setting intentions for the week. So the rest of this resource, I want to get into the actual template, but this is, all of these steps are captured in the template, but what I've noticed is that, especially for people new to Notion or, still exploring it, going through these types of exercises before jumping into a more complex template, or even trying to build your own, is just helpful as an exercise to align your week, both in terms of, goals, objectives, and then also down to like tracking habits and tracking how you're feeling throughout the week. So with that said, let's see where we got with the poll. So looks like the winner was managing time was the biggest struggle, with a close second being connecting tasks to bigger goals. That's something that I've noticed probably the most common one. And focusing too much on details. Cool. Super interesting to see. All right. Okay, so what I want to do now is think of the inverse in terms of, we know the mistakes, we know the common challenges with planning our week or not planning it, or planning specific pieces. This is getting through a system that, for some people might be tracking way too much, but, this also trying to encapsulate a combination of journaling, project management, knowledge management, and habit tracking. So really trying to see how can all of these work with each other and kind of feed off each other. And again, the biggest reason why I'm such a proponent of Notion is when we think about related databases and being able to send information, across different views and dashboards, you start to get these really awesome scenarios of you can see lots of information in one place. And that's something that, when I think about writing in a physical journal or using other tools like task managers or project managers, never quite got that level of visibility into that information, which is pretty cool. So just to get a sense of what's happening on the screen. So on this left side, this is a call out, and each of these toggles has notes on what are we doing in this particular step of the weekly planning process. So this is, kind of a note to self thing in terms of, we've been using the system a couple weeks and, we're tired and we want to remind ourselves, what exactly am I doing in the key results section? So, expanding on this area just gives us some insight as to what the goal is for this part. So the other part, this is something that, for example, if you're using, a phone or a tablet, linking to the database itself within the toggle gives you the option to open a focused view into that database. So, if you have scenarios where you're kind of overwhelmed and you really just want to focus in on your daily planner, each of these areas you can move into, and then you've got a focused view of the week. And typically this is auto-filtered to the current week, but I purposefully put up last week to see what does a full week look like in terms of the information that you see. So, and each of these sections has just specific notes as to like what are the actions that are taking place, and also how are these databases filtered and sorted, because you might look at the same database in different ways depending on the actions that you're taking, or the goal for that particular step of the weekly plan. If we dive into one of these, so let's take a look at what's happening, for example, in the daily planner. So if I open up this day, actually, if I look at this drop down, this is using page templates. So another big benefit of using databases is you can start to create templates for different types of pages, which over time can save you a lot of manual input of adding properties or adding information. And for those actions that are repeated or that we do on a recurring basis, setting up templates really just kind of saves a lot of time. So something to consider there. But you can see here there's a template for each day, so that I kind of bring in this cover image. But if we open up this particular day, so this is a daily planner, so every day has its own page, there's really two key sections. There's a space to add in like a word of the day, tracking feeling throughout the day, specific habits. So in some cases we might not be tracking habits in Notion or tracking them elsewhere. But in this case, I like to kind of see, how it's going throughout the week. Events, this could be anything from like meetings, webinars, or other activities that are taking place, just as a mental reminder. And then these last two, which are, reading and exercise, these are also bringing in information from other databases. So anytime you see that arrow, that means that this is connected to, in this case, the library database. So this is just kind of like seeing, everything that's being pulled into the library. Just quick question, shout out to anybody if you use Readwise. So if you haven't heard of it or you're curious, I think it's readwise.io. Yeah, so Leanne, totally. It's one of my favorite, probably top three behind Notion, but just allows you to connect like your Kindle, or if you listen to podcasts often, or just like to save articles from the internet. Just great to build up that knowledge management place in Notion. So definitely check it out. Also, exercise, weight. And then if we get into journal, there's 4 key categories of journaling that I found kind of encapsulate, like if I'm adding notes, they tend to fall into one of these 4 categories. But gratitude and intentions, these tend to happen in the morning. So that AM journal entries. And then wins and challenges, which are more toward the end of the day. So as I'm closing out the day, logging at least 1 win and 1 challenge. Also, this is heavily influenced by the bullet journal method by Ryder Carroll. So this came from an exploration of what would a bullet journal look like in Notion, and applying it again in a database, just to be able to see these entries and filter them in different ways. That, in my experience, has been easier than flipping through manual pages. All for pen and paper, definitely for creative output and just getting ideas out there. But, still a big Notion guy. So we're looking at the daily planner, and, I like to start there. But if we get into key results, so if we're imagining it's a Friday afternoon or Sunday morning, whatever time period you like to set up the week, what we're looking at is a few things. We're looking at the key results database, but you'll notice these are also tied to specific objectives. So if, for example, I open up this key result of 3 creator blog posts, this is tied to an objective, a parent objective, which let's just open that up quickly. We can see that this objective has certain key results tied to it, and bigger goals. So, if we think of the goal as annual, and then we can see any areas that this is related to or corresponding to. And then confidence level, if you haven't checked out Christina Wacke's book, Radical Focus, which really dives into objectives and key results and the whole framework, setting your confidence level and updating it over time, over the course of the quarter, just to get a sense of the progress that you're making and how you're feeling about it, more from a qualitative standpoint. But if I go back, the key action here is moving 2 to 3 key results into the in focus space. So if we're starting a new week and we're kind of taking these out, let's say we've got creating a new Notion template and creator focus video, and we're focusing on, say, YouTube audience. So this is kind of a visual reminder of what the focus is for this particular week, and moving into projects and tasks, starting to prioritize based on key results. So another big common challenge is prioritizing every key result every day and every week, which means that none of them really get the attention or the energy or the deep work that they deserve or that they need to kind of make progress. So really just kind of focusing in and having an awareness that each week we're probably going to have a different combination of key results that we're focusing on. And then we get into journaling. This is specifically setting up and adding a journal entry for the week. So I changed the filter a little bit to show previous weeks, but this is something that also helps to visually connect different areas of your Notion space. So starting to color code by area. So for example, in this case, and in the template, purple is anything related to content creation, blue is personal, and actually if we click on this area, every key database has that same color system just to strengthen those connections between databases. So often, if we're seeing a lot of text or, we're using emoji, it could get overwhelming in terms of the amount of information. So this is just a way to help signal, what type of journal entry this is or what type of project this is. And then if we go into the next area, looking at events, this is also filtered from the previous week. So step one of events would be just kind of logging, what events, time blocks we have, and then starting to see those by day. So this is kind of mimicking a calendar view. Actually, a video that I'm starting to work on is how to integrate this with Google Calendar. So using an automation tool like Zapier, you can bring these things in automatically and kind of not have to manually input that data, which is pretty cool. But in the meantime, this is just kind of to get a sense of what's happening on that particular day. And then there's also just a section on, at the end of the day, how much of these were completed. So Monday was 100%, Tuesday 37%. So setting these week over week, we start to kind of like flex that muscle of having an awareness of how much we can get done and, prioritizing less tasks. And then if we, let's close these here so we can get into projects. So another huge benefit of databases, this webinar is turning into my love affair with databases, but we have different views that we can choose from based on the type of information that we're seeing. So in this case, when we're looking at projects and we're looking at key due dates and scheduling and roadmaps, we can start to see what's overlapping, what needs to maybe be pushed back to prioritize another project, or can we move up a particular project that's related to another one. So being able to see what's happening in terms of a timeline view is super helpful. And then if we look at how it's sorted, it's really just sorted by the projects that are ascending by due date. So later due date is lower on the screen, and then also it's filtered to active. So again, the key with databases is how can we filter the information so that even if there's a lot of information in the database, we're only seeing the information that we need at that particular moment. So in this scenario, we actually have two views of the database. So if I go to layout and show database, so this and the following is actually showing the same database, but showing it in very different ways. So whereas the first one was only active projects with upcoming due dates, this is a little bit different where it's anything that's not done, and it's sorted in a few different ways. So in this case, it's sorted by highest priority. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can start to see that all the highest priority projects are at the very top. And if we're thinking through, that Sunday morning, Friday evening, prioritizing those 2 or 3 projects that you want to make big progress on and having a visual for that, so that as you get later in the week, it's a reminder of what you had decided was the most important going into this week. And then also, there will be a recording. It will be on YouTube after some editing, and I will follow via email with everybody who RSVP'd. So in case you were wondering, there will be an opportunity to do a quick walkthrough. Also, if we get into an actions database, so actions, tasks used interchangeably in this scenario, but in this case, we're again relating the task database to the projects database, which allows us to not only set up a Kanban view where we can move tasks from not started to up next to doing, but we can also subgroup by project. So similarly to the other views that we just saw, we are setting the priority to highest priority at the top. The due date is working our way up, so the earliest due dates show up at the top, and the active tasks show up at the top. So what that means is that we can see every active project and toggle open and closed where we're at with each of these projects. So for example, 10 Steps to Master Weekly Planning, which is a blog post which was just created from a template. These tasks were automatically applied, which in the past have tended to be the main actions that take place for a blog post. So from there, it's a matter of moving those from left to right. Cool. So just a quick deep dive on how this is set up. So we're looking at the actions database, and if we get into the grouping, so first we're grouping by status, which gives us that from left to right Kanban view. But then if we go into subgroup, which I think is only an option for this board style view, we can see here that we're grouping by projects. So in order to do this, you do need to relate these two databases together to be able to have that option. Also, it's a relatively new feature, but in this case, a few other edits, we're hiding any empty groups. So if there's any outdated projects, things like that, and then it's sorted manually, so you can kind of move these around based on maybe priority or personal preference. And then these are all just kind of hidden projects, which again, we want to focus on only the active projects, but we do need to relate those together. And for example, if we were to let's go to any one of these tasks. So if we go into an action, we have all of these properties that are being tracked. A lot of these properties may end up being empty. We're not going through and manually adding information for every property, but the key ones I want to highlight are, this is related to the projects database. And then if we move down, if, for example, we have any documents that are tied to a project, they'll also roll up here. So a roll up is when you're bringing in pages or data from a related database, even though it's not connected to, in this case, actions. So these are all information that's coming from that parent project, but in some cases are helpful to see, in the context of actions. Great question, relations versus roll-ups. So the short answer is I like to use relations when we want to see, we want to group or to filter by that related database. I think the key difference with also with roll-ups is roll-ups are really about bringing in information from another database. So, and we'll take a look at one in terms of like the weekly reflection, but it's really just like if you want to bring in data from another database, roll-ups also require you to relate one database to another. So step one would be relating these two together, and then from there you have the option to roll up any data from properties from that other database. So something to keep in mind there. And again, roll-ups and relations can definitely freak us out if there's like 30 properties in a template, for example. But kind of starting from scratch and really just kind of mapping out what are the most effective connections between different information. And I'm going to kind of quickly go through these and then jump to the reflection part, just so that there's some time for Q&A if we have any questions. But again, we're looking at the same actions database, but in a slightly different way. So if I close some of these, expand on the template. We can also start to assign things like priority level. So if low, medium, high, and also an estimate of the time that's needed for that particular task. We might find that in some cases we're not adding these properties or we have a good sense of how long something's going to take. But in some cases it could be helpful to just map out and again start to filter by where I want to see only actions that are 60 minutes or more to be able to assign time blocks throughout the week. Scenarios like that, which could be helpful. And again, we're leveraging like the Notion machine to sort these actions and tasks in a way that we want. So it could be helpful there. So, again, if we're using that sidebar, again, these are all linked. So if I wanted to open this by itself, I can do that. But I know some people like to kind of have a focused view versus having that sidebar for quick access. And so next part, we're getting into key results. Now, again, we're looking at the same database as the step 2, but it's a little bit different because in this case, we are adding data based on how the week went. So if we've got key results, if one of my key results for the quarter is creating 3 business-centric Notion templates, then I'm adding, the data on those. And great thing about progress bars is, you can get that visual understanding of where you're at. So at the end of the quarter, what's likely to happen is you're crushing some key results and in other key results, you're coming up woefully short. But that's the goal. Because at the end of the quarter, we can see for those key results that fell short, do we want to prioritize them going into the next quarter? And how do we do that? What projects will move the needle to, give us that push that we need to get to that key result? Again, I want to preface this by, when this is implemented in companies, it could take several quarters for key results and objectives and key results to take on and to become part of a team's workflow or a company's workflow. So this is definitely a challenging system, not only to get started with, but to incorporate into things like weekly planning. So it took me 2 quarters even just to kind of push through like logging data. And once I got to the end of the first quarter, I was like, okay, this is super helpful because now I can see how I did in comparison to what I imagined doing at the beginning of the quarter. So super powerful. Does take some time. I'd say the objectives and key results are like the most challenging part of weekly planning and specifically like this system, but just yields kind of amazing results in terms of visibility into how you're doing. Daily planner. So this is looking at the same database as what we started out with. However, we're looking at it in a different way. So we're looking at how we did on habits and just reflecting on words of the day, how we felt throughout the days of the week, any exercise, reading, things like that. So if I'm just gonna kind of change this up a little bit. So we're going to say, instead of the current week, let's see, we'll add a filter group and we'll say date is on or after 10th and on or before the 16th, so we can kind of get that. Not sure why that's working, not working. Let's pause that real quick. Date is on or after. Well, let's go with that one. So if we're looking at the previous week, we can see, what this looks like filled in terms of what you're tracking. So the one thing I would say is, this is in this example, we're tracking like articles, books, podcasts, and exercise. However, we might end up just tracking projects or just tracking habits. And it's definitely an important question to prioritize. What are the things that are highest priority, and maybe the areas that you're falling short or you really want to focus in on, and not get distracted by, wanting to track every, specific area, whether it's habits, projects, or journaling. So definitely, if it's something that you're getting started with in terms of weekly planning, I would highly suggest just focusing on one area. Maybe it's just starting with objectives and key results, or habits, and getting a sense of how to track these like metrics, and just kind of getting into that mind space. Cool. So, all right. And then one other area, this is just reflecting on journal entries. So again, that categorization by type, looking at gratitude, intentions, wins, and challenges. Actually, I haven't reviewed this. Hopefully there's nothing controversial in here, but doesn't look like it. But just being able to see, it's amazing how much we can forget in even like 1 or 2 days. So being able to go back into the week and say, oh, wow, that was a big win on Monday or Tuesday. And again, the importance of reflection is being able to celebrate those wins and, put a microscope over those challenges to define like, how do we jump into that challenge next week and the following week, and really just, use that visibility to our advantage. And then lastly, just kind of reflecting on the week, closing out. If we, pop into this and get a bit more specific, this is, the type is reflection, and it's set to the current week. So now we can see, over time at the end of the quarter, not only can you see your daily journal entries, but intentions that you had for each week and reflections that you had for each week. So again, there might be some areas if you're not getting as granular with, say, project management. I know definitely with some teams within companies, they focus less on projects and more on specific tasks, as an example. So, organizing actions by projects is a little bit more granular and may not be something that you need, but again, it gives you that opportunity to filter with more granularity. So key things that I want us to leave with are, where we've had these challenges, these could kind of work to our advantage. So if we focus in on 2 to 3 key results per week, where do we want to move the needle for this week? And if we haven't set up key results, I would suggest just kind of experimenting with it, see if for quarter 2, if we can set up 3 objectives and key results for each objective to get more specific with our goals. Setting intentions, prioritizing, what projects we want to take on. If you're a content creator or if you're a freelancer, the number of active projects can seem endless, but which is why this part is so critical. And then also when we get into reflection, making sure to log, where we ended the week in terms of any metrics that you've decided were most valuable. And really from a qualitative standpoint, what were the wins and challenges of that week? So we're combining skills that are part project management, part journaling, and part habit tracking in the same space. So even though there's a lot in there, the visibility that we get from seeing what we're tracking in the same place just gives way more insight into where we're at, how much we've grown, and where do we want to focus our time and energy going into the future. So yeah, that's a little that's a overview of the system. And just to go back into the template questions. So I'll drop this in the chat for anybody who's interested, And also there's a discount code for everybody here. So for anybody who uses Manifest all lowercase, it's like 40% off of the template price. And then also I've started working on a course, which is kind of a 10-part series of lessons that dive deep into not only what we're doing in each of the sections, but how we can start to think about creating our own dashboard, formatted in the same way where we're bringing in information from different databases, but where you're driving the decisions around things like what habits are being tracked, how are we managing projects, what kind of properties do we want to account for, so that the weekly planner ends up being kind of a custom, super personalized space for you to track your weeks and also do those main things there. So want to open it up if there's any questions, and if there are questions, I do want to point out one last little detail, which is, where do all these databases live? So from that planner, there's a space called systems, which is whether I'm working with clients or with creators, like to kind of use a similar process where we have all of our databases in one place, just to be able to know where they are and make sure that we're not losing databases or accidentally deleting them. But all of these sections play a role in the system. So some of these may not be part of it if they're like more specific. For example, like visual inspiration, I think is a personal one. But for the most part, this is where all of the databases live, versus the dashboard is really a curated view of all of this information. So just want to point that out in terms of if you're thinking about building your own dashboard, having a space to organize all your databases, and then having a dashboard and kind of thinking about them as like slightly different spaces, where systems is, like the back end or the kind of vault type space, whereas a dashboard is more user facing. Cool. So Manny asks, how easy it is to integrate into the Manifest OS system? I would say the part that I'm working on now which is about documentation with the weekly planner, is meant to kind of lay out instructions on how are these databases set up and how are they filtered, because it's using almost the exact same databases as Manifest OS. So the goal would be to have that documentation and ideally, set this database view up with your existing content. That way, you're not migrating content over, which could be a pain. It's kind of one of the limiting parts about templates in general with Notion. And that's something that with the weekly planner, sharing documentation and then reaching back out to users as to if there were any changes, we're logging them, and if there's any guidance on migrating from your workspace or setting up the same view in your current workspace. Heidi asks, what's Manifest? Manifest was the name that I came up with about this time last year for creating a template. It just started from sharing a screenshot of my own kind of dashboard, and then decided to release it as a template. But I like the fact that it can be considered a manifest, like a document, but also we're manifesting growth and manifesting success. So a little background on the branding side of that. Yamaida, you get the last question. How do you divide your big goals into little ones? Great question and a great space to end on. So if we take a look at, there's a lot going on here, but the short end of it is I've got annual goals. So these are, again, aspirational, big thinking, long-term, not very specific. Building habit of daily meditation, still working on that one. And objectives and key results. Objectives are based on the quarter, and key results are tied to an objective. So if we get into something like write 18 newsletters, this is related to grow your Notion productivity audience, as an example. So this was from, I think, Q1. Didn't quite get there, but yeah, that's just a quick note on that one. Annual goal, aspirational, doesn't have to be too specific. Quarterly objectives, where do you want to be by the end of the quarter when it comes to like your work or personal areas. And then key results are specifically the metrics that you're tracking to get there. I do want to thank you all for attending. Hope this was helpful. And if we're not sure where to start, definitely with that 10 steps to a masterful weekly plan, just to kind of get these ideas on paper before we get into more complex systems or dashboards in Notion. And starting small and really focusing in on one area at a time. So hope that was helpful. Hopefully see you in the next webinar, which I'll be sharing the topic of that in the next couple of days. But if you got any questions whatsoever about Notion or anything, I'll try my best to respond, but yeah, would love to hear them. So have a great rest of your Mondays.